At 2:06 a.m., Victor Kane receives the phone call that changes everything. For years, his name had carried weight in places most people never see. Power, influence, and a reputation that made others step carefully around him. But none of that mattered when the call came through his phone in the middle of a violent storm. A nurse from Mercy Ridge Hospital spoke with urgency in her voice. The woman Victor once loved was in critical condition. She was in labor, and without an immediate blood transfusion, she might not survive. For a moment, Victor didn't speak. The storm outside his mansion roared like an angry ocean, thunder rolling across the cliffs below. 6 months earlier, he had forced that same woman out of his life during a bitter argument, refusing to believe her when she told him she was pregnant. Now the truth was crashing back into his world like the storm outside his windows. The nurse continued explaining. The hospital was facing a crisis. Roads were flooded, the storm had disrupted supply routes, and the hospital's blood bank was nearly empty. Her blood type was AB negative, extremely rare, and according to the donor registry, Victor was one of the only compatible matches nearby. Suddenly, the distance between past mistakes and present consequences felt painfully small. Victor grabbed his keys. "I'm coming," he said quietly. Outside, the rain fell in relentless sheets as Victor's vehicle sped through the dark coastal highway. Water rushed across the road, debris scattered everywhere, and lightning illuminated the sky in brief flashes of white. Every mile felt longer than the last. Inside the car, memories flooded his mind. Her laughter, her patience, the way she had always believed there was still something good inside him, and the night he had turned her away. By the time the hospital finally appeared through the storm, glowing against the darkness, Victor was already running through the entrance doors. The emergency department was tense and chaotic. Staff moved quickly between patients as backup generators hummed softly in the background. A nurse approached him immediately. "Victor Kane?" she asked. He nodded. She led him upstairs to the maternity floor where doctors were preparing for an emergency procedure. Through the small window of the operating room preparation area, Victor saw her lying on the bed, pale, weak, fighting to hold on. For the first time in years, the man who had faced countless dangerous situations felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The doctor stepped out to speak with him. "We need to move quickly," he explained. "She's losing blood, and the baby is in distress. Your donation could make the difference." Victor didn't hesitate. "Take whatever you need," he said. Minutes later, medical staff were preparing the transfusion while the surgical team readied the operating room. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside the hospital, time felt like it was running out. Victor sat quietly as nurses worked, staring through the glass toward the room where the woman he once loved was fighting for her life. For the first time in a long time, he realized something. Power couldn't fix everything. Money couldn't erase mistakes. But maybe, just maybe, this night could still change the ending. And as the surgical lights switched on and the doctors prepared to begin, Victor understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was the moment that would decide everything. For her, for the child, and for the man he still had a chance to become. At 2:06 a.m., Victor Kane, once a powerful and feared figure in the city's shadowy world, receives a call that shatters the emotional walls he spent years building. On the other end of the line is a trembling nurse from Mercy Ridge Hospital. His former partner, Leah, is in critical condition during childbirth, and the only person whose blood can save her is Victor, the same woman he pushed away 6 months earlier when she told him she was pregnant. Back then, Victor didn't believe her. He convinced himself it was a lie. Now, as a violent storm crashes over the city and the hospital struggles with failing power, Victor must race through the darkness, not just to save 2 lives, but to face the guilt he has been running from. If this story of redemption and second chances speaks to you, leave a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Now let's begin the longest night of Victor Kane's life. Underscore. The storm outside was relentless. Victor stood beside the massive windows of his cliffside home, watching waves crash against the rocks far below. Lightning ripped across the sky, briefly illuminating the ocean before darkness swallowed everything again. Rain struck the glass in relentless bursts, Nature itself seemed angry tonight. He slowly swirled a glass of scotch in his hand, the dim glow of the fireplace reflecting in the amber liquid. But tonight it tasted bitter. The grandfather clock down the hallway chimed twice. 2:06 a.m. The hour when the world felt quiet enough for regrets to speak. Victor stared at his reflection in the glass. At 38, he looked composed and powerful to most people. Tall, sharp-featured, always dressed with precision. But tonight the man staring back looked tired. The silence broke when his phone vibrated on the marble table. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. Something about the persistence made him answer. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you're calling at this hour," Victor said calmly. "Mr. Kane, this is Sarah Chun from Mercy Ridge Hospital." Her voice shook. "I'm calling about Leo Wynn." Victor froze. The name struck him harder than the thunder outside. He hadn't heard it spoken in 6 months. 6 months since the night he sent her away. "She listed you as her emergency contact," the nurse continued carefully. "She's in labor. But there are serious complications." Victor's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "What kind of complications?" "She's losing a lot of blood," Sarah said. "Our supply is low because of the storm. And her blood type is extremely rare." Victor already knew what she was about to say. "AB negative," the nurse confirmed. "Your records show you have the same type. You might be the only match nearby." For a moment the room felt like it was spinning. 6 months earlier, Leah had stood in his doorway during another storm, soaked from the rain, one hand resting on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, Victor." And he had refused to believe her. The memory hit him like a blade. "I'm on my way," Victor said quietly. Underscore. The race, the drive that normally took 40 minutes became a desperate battle against the storm. Flooded roads. Fallen branches. Wind pushing the vehicle sideways. Victor gripped the steering wheel as lightning flashed across the sky, memories racing through his mind. Leah laughing at his rare attempts at humor. Leah painting in the sunlight near the living room window. Leah whispering that she loved him. And Leah standing alone in the rain the night he told her to leave. "I was wrong," he muttered into the empty car. For the first time in years, Victor felt something he had long forgotten. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of arriving too late. Underscore. Mercy Ridge Hospital. When he finally reached Mercy Ridge Hospital, the storm had already knocked out part of the city's power grid. Backup generators hummed through the building. Inside, the emergency ward was tense and chaotic. Machines beeped. Doctors moved quickly between rooms. Sarah Chin spotted him immediately and rushed forward. "Mr. Kane." He nodded. "How is she?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Critical. The doctors need to perform emergency surgery, but we need more blood first." "Take mine," Victor said instantly. For the operation, within minutes Victor was seated in a donation chair, watching dark red blood fill the collection bags. Each unit drained his strength, but he refused to stop. Every drop felt like a small attempt to correct the worst mistake of his life. Then suddenly, the lights flickered. The generator struggled. Doctors rushed past in urgent motion. The storm had damaged the hospital's main power supply. For a terrifying moment, the operating room went completely dark. Emergency lights switched on, casting the room in pale white glow. The surgery had already begun. Victor stood behind the glass window, watching helplessly as the team fought to save Leah. Minutes stretched endlessly. Then suddenly, a sound broke through the tension. A newborn cry. Soft at first, then stronger. Victor closed his eyes as relief flooded through him. "It's a boy," someone announced. The power surged back to full strength moments later as mobile generators connected outside. The room filled with the steady rhythm of medical equipment once again. And on the monitor beside Leah's bed, her heartbeat grew stronger. Victor finally allowed himself to breathe. When Victor woke hours later in a recovery room, pale sunlight filled the hospital corridor. The storm had passed. A nurse quickly reassured him. Leia survived the surgery. Relief washed through him like a wave. Soon after, Victor stood quietly beside her hospital bed, holding her hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." For the first time in years, Victor Kane wasn't thinking about power, influence, or control, only about the fragile second chance life had given him. And somewhere in the hospital's neonatal unit, a newborn boy slept peacefully, waiting to meet his father. Victor stood silently beside the incubator in the NICU. Inside the transparent chamber, his son slept beneath a tiny knitted cap, wires and sensors attached to his fragile body. The infant's chest rose and fell in small, steady breaths, completely unaware of the chaos that had surrounded his arrival into the world. The chaos of storms, of mistakes, of broken hearts, and of a father who had almost lost everything before he even understood what he had. A nurse stepped beside Victor. "You can touch him," she said gently. "There's a port in the side. Just be careful." Victor hesitated. His hands, large, rough, marked with old scars, looked completely out of place beside something so small and delicate. Still, he slowly reached through the opening. His finger brushed against the baby's cheek. Warm, soft, alive. The infant stirred slightly and made a tiny protesting sound. Victor froze instantly. "It's okay," the nurse whispered. "Babies can sense their parents." Parents. The word landed on Victor like both a burden and a gift. He was a father now, responsible for this tiny human who had no idea what kind of man had brought him into the world. Victor leaned closer to the incubator. "Hey there, little one," he murmured. His voice was rough. "I'm your dad, and I'm completely unprepared for this." The baby's eyes opened slightly, unfocused, drifting somewhere between sleep and awareness. Victor exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "My own father taught me that strength meant cruelty, that love was weakness." He paused. "I built my whole life around those lessons." The baby's tiny hand curled reflexively around Victor's finger. The grip was weak, but determined. Something inside Victor cracked open. "But I'm going to try," he whispered. "I'm going to try to give you something I never had. Safety. Love. A father who chooses you every single day." The baby yawned softly and drifted back to sleep, still holding Victor's finger. Victor stood there for a long time, watching, protecting, understanding something for the first time in years. This was what mattered now. Not power, not reputation, not control. This tiny life. "Mr. Kane." Victor turned. Sarah Chun stood behind him, urgency in her expression. "She's waking up." Victor's heart skipped. "Leia, her vitals are improving. Dr. Reeves says she's regaining consciousness." Victor looked at his son one more time, memorizing every detail. Then he gently slipped his finger free. "I'll be back," he whispered to the sleeping baby. Recovery Room 7 was quiet except for the soft rhythm of medical monitors. Leia lay motionless on the hospital bed, pale but breathing steadily. Victor sat beside her, waiting. Her eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, they opened. Confusion filled her eyes as she looked at the ceiling. Then the room. Then finally, Victor. Recognition struck instantly. Shock. Then anger. Then pain. "You," she whispered hoarsely. "What are you doing here?" Victor opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Leia tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her body. "The baby!" she cried suddenly, hands flying to her stomach. "Where is my baby?" Dr. Reeves quickly stepped forward. "Miss Wynn, please stay calm. Your son is alive and stable. He's currently in the NICU." Her entire body relaxed as tears streamed down her face. "A son." Victor finally found his voice. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, he said softly. "He's perfect." Leia looked at him then. Her eyes burned with months of pain. "Why are you here?" "The hospital called me," Victor said quietly. "You were listed as the emergency contact." Her voice broke. "I said that months ago, before you threw me out." Silence filled the room. Victor lowered his gaze. "Leia, I'm sorry." Her hand shot up. "Don't." Her voice trembled with emotion. "You don't get to show up here and apologize like that fixes anything." "I know it doesn't." 6 months ago, she continued bitterly, "I stood in your mansion in the middle of a storm and told you I was pregnant. Do you remember what you said to me?" Victor's jaw tightened. Every word. "You called me a liar," she said. "A gold digger. You said I was trying to trap you." Her voice cracked. "I loved you, Victor. I loved you with everything I had, and you looked at me like I was nothing. Victor closed his eyes briefly. I was wrong. I was paranoid and afraid of caring about someone enough to lose them. Tears slid down Leia's face. Well, congratulations, she said coldly. You succeeded. Silence settled again. Then Victor spoke. The hospital said you were dying. His voice was raw. And our son might not make it. He looked directly at her. And I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live in a world where you died thinking I didn't care. Leia stared at him for a long moment. Well, I didn't die. Her voice hardened again. So you can leave now. Victor shook his head slowly. I'm not leaving. I want to be here. For you. For him. You don't get that choice, she whispered. Before Victor could respond, the door burst open. Dr. Reeves rushed inside. Miss Wynne, we need you. The baby's oxygen levels dropped suddenly. Skin-to-skin contact might help stabilize him. Leia immediately tried to sit up. Bring him to me. Minutes later, the nurses carefully placed the tiny infant against her chest. Leia gasped softly when she saw him for the first time. Oh, tears streamed down her cheeks. You're so beautiful. The baby stirred. His breathing slowly stabilized. Victor watched silently from the side of the room, feeling like an outsider. Then Leia looked up at him. Come here. Victor hesitated, then stepped closer. This is your father, Leia whispered to the baby. He broke my heart. But he saved our lives last night. Victor swallowed hard. I can't forgive you yet, she said quietly. But our son deserves a father. So if you truly want to be better, you get one chance. Victor nodded. I won't hurt him, he said. Or you. Not again. The week of bed rest was harder than the week before. Leia hated every second of it. Not because she didn't trust Victor with Alexander, but because every time she needed his help, it reminded her how fragile she had become. She couldn't lift her own son without pain, couldn't bend down to pick up a dropped blanket, couldn't even stand long enough to make herself tea. And every time Victor stepped in to help, quietly, patiently, without a single complaint, it made the conflict inside her even worse. Because the man helping her now was nothing like the man who had thrown her out months ago. Victor adapted quickly. He woke before Alexander cried, prepared bottles before they were needed, learned how to change diapers with surprising efficiency, and he never once complained about sleeping on the futon, not even when Alexander screamed at 3 in the morning. Victor had spent most of his life fighting wars, battles for territory, for power, for survival. But this was something else entirely, a different kind of battle, one fought in silence. Every day, he made the same decision again. To stay, to help, to prove that the man he used to be was no longer in control. Some nights, he sat quietly beside Alexander's bassinet, watching the baby sleep. Tiny chest, rising and falling, small fingers curled into fists. A life that had no idea how complicated the world really was. Victor would whisper softly into the darkness. I'm going to do better for you. Even if Alexander was too young to understand. Underscore. Leia watches. Leia noticed everything. The way Victor checked the locks every night. The way he positioned Alexander's bassinet where he could see it from the futon. The way he instinctively stood between the door and the baby whenever someone knocked. He never said it out loud. But Victor was protecting them. Always. One evening, she finally asked the question that had been sitting in her mind for days. Do you miss it? Victor looked up from washing bottles in the sink. Miss what? The power. The life you had before. Victor dried his hands slowly before answering. Sometimes, he admitted. But not the parts you think. Leia raised an eyebrow. I miss the certainty. In my old world, every problem had a clear solution. Someone betrayed you. You removed them. Someone threatened your territory. You eliminated the threat. Everything was simple. He looked toward Alexander sleeping peacefully. This life isn't simple. You can't solve a crying baby with intimidation. You can't fix heartbreak with power. And you can't earn forgiveness by force. Victor met her gaze. This life is harder. But it's real. The first smile 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Alexander smiled. It wasn't a reflex. Not one of those random expressions newborns sometimes make. It was real. Victor had been making ridiculous faces while trying to calm him after a diaper change. Suddenly, Alexander's tiny mouth curved upward. A small, perfect smile. Victor froze. Leia, he whispered urgently. Look. She leaned forward from the bed. Alexander smiled again. For both of them. And for the first time in weeks. Leia laughed. A genuine laugh. Soft. Warm. Victor felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. Maybe even years. For a moment, they weren't two people trapped in the wreckage of a broken relationship. They were just parents, watching their son discover the world. Underscore. Trust. 1 inch at a time. Trust didn't return overnight. It didn't magically repair itself, but it started in small ways. Leia stopped watching Victor every second when he held Alexander. She started letting him prepare her meals. Sometimes she even asked for help instead of pretending she didn't need it. One night, as Victor finished washing bottles, Leia spoke quietly from the bed. You're still sleeping on the futon? Victor looked up. That was the agreement. She hesitated. You can move the bassinet closer to the bed if you want. It wasn't much, but Victor understood what it meant. It was the first inch of trust. And sometimes, an inch was the beginning of everything. Underscore. A storm returning, but outside their small apartment. The past was beginning to move again. Victor's old world didn't disappear quietly. Power never did. Somewhere in the city, men who once answered to Victor Kane were noticing his absence. Territories had changed hands. Money had moved, and not everyone was happy with the new order. One name, in particular, had started appearing in whispers. Dmitry Volkov, a man who had once been Victor's ally, now possibly his enemy. And enemies had a way of finding weaknesses. Victor looked toward the sleeping baby and the exhausted woman resting nearby. For the first time in years, he finally had something to lose. And that made the coming storm far more dangerous than the last one. Victor became her hands. Every diaper, every bottle, every tiny task that a mother should have been able to do herself. Leia hated it. She hated needing him. But Victor never complained. Instead, he listened carefully to every instruction she gave. The exact way Alexander's formula had to be mixed. The precise angle to hold the bottle. The quiet melody Leia hummed whenever the baby refused to sleep. Victor learned it all. Patiently. Silently. Like a soldier learning a new mission. And in those quiet moments, he learned something else too. Late at night, when she thought he was asleep, Leia cried. Not loudly, just quiet, broken sobs behind the bathroom door. She mourned the pregnancy she never truly got to experience, the motherhood she had imagined, the independence she had lost. Victor never mentioned it. Sometimes love wasn't fixing things. Sometimes it was simply standing nearby. Underscore. Underscore. 2 weeks later, 14 days after the surgery, they returned to the hospital. Dr. Reeves examined the incision carefully. The stitches had held this time. The wound had healed. And finally, Leia was cleared to hold her son again. When the doctor placed Alexander in her arms, something in her face changed. Relief, joy, and a quiet peace Victor hadn't seen since the day he found her in that hospital bed. For Victor, that moment alone made every sleepless night worth it. Underscore. That evening the apartment was quiet. Alexander slept peacefully in his bassinet. Leia rested on the bed. Victor had just begun to believe things might finally stabilize. When his phone rang, one name appeared on the screen. Dmitry Volyulov. Victor stepped into the hallway before answering. Kane. Dmitry said immediately. We have a problem. Victor's stomach tightened. What kind of problem? The Koslov family. They're furious about you giving me the West Side territory. They say it was promised to them 3 years ago. Victor exhaled slowly. Then tell them the deal is void. That was the old Victor's promise. Dmitry scoffed. That's not how this world works. The Koslovs don't care that you've gone soft. They're threatening war. Victor closed his eyes. The past had come back, exactly like he feared. What do you want me to do? He asked. Meet them, Dmitry said. You're the only one they'll listen to. Victor's instincts screamed. Trap. Danger. Death. But Dmitri had saved his life more than once. And abandoning him now felt like betrayal. When? Victor asked quietly. Tomorrow night. Old warehouse on 5th Street. Victor hesitated, then finally said the words he knew would cost him everything. I'll be there. Understood. Inside the apartment when Victor returned. Leia was sitting up in bed, her face already pale. Everything okay? Victor hesitated, but he had promised no more lies. There's a situation, he admitted. Something from my old life. I have to meet some people tomorrow night. Leia's voice turned tight with fear. What kind of meeting? The kind where I stop dangerous men from starting a war. Her eyes filled with tears. You said you were done with that world. I am, Victor said. But my exit created problems. And if I don't fix them, people will die. Leia's voice cut like glass. But you can abandon us? Victor froze. What happens if you go? She continued. And you don't come back? What happens to Alexander? What happens to me? Victor knelt beside the bed. I will come back. But Leia shook her head. Don't make promises you can't keep. Tears streamed down her face now. I lived with that fear for months when we were together. Every phone call, every night. I thought someone would tell me you were dead. Her voice broke completely. I can't live like that again. Victor felt something collapse inside his chest. What do you want me to do? He asked. And Leia gave him the choice that would change everything. Choose, she said. Choose right now. Your old life, or this one? Understood. Morning decision. Victor didn't sleep. Not for a single minute. By sunrise, the apartment was filled with quiet tension. Alexander woke at 6. Victor fed him by the window as the sun painted the room gold. Your dad is about to do something incredibly stupid, he whispered softly to the baby. You're right, he added a moment later. That's a terrible excuse. Behind him, Leia spoke. You're making promises again. Victor looked over. She was sitting up now, exhausted and red-eyed. What are the chances you don't come back? She asked. Victor didn't lie. 30%, he said. Maybe 40. Leia's breath caught. Those are terrible odds. Victor looked down at his son, then back at her. What would you do if you were me? Leia stepped closer, her voice quiet but unwavering. I would choose the people who need me now. I would choose my son's future. I would choose love over loyalty to a world that was never going to love me back. Victor stared at her, and in that moment, everything became clear. He pulled out his phone, dialed Dmitri. The line rang twice. Kane, Dmitri said. Victor took a deep breath. I'm not coming to the meeting. Silence. Then Dmitri's furious voice exploded through the phone. You're signing my death warrant. Victor looked at Alexander, then at Leia, and finally answered. I'm choosing my family. Victor Kane once ruled the city from the shadows, a feared mafia boss whose name alone could start wars or end them. Power, money, and control were his entire world. But everything changed the night he nearly lost the only two people who truly mattered. When Leia risked her life to bring their son Alexander into the world, Victor was forced to confront the truth he had spent years avoiding. The empire he built was nothing compared to the family he almost destroyed. For the first time in his life, the ruthless kingpin chose something different. He walked away from the underworld, leaving behind territories, enemies, and even his closest allies. It wasn't easy. Old loyalties were broken, friendships were lost, and the past refused to let him go quietly. But Victor made a choice. Not for power, not for revenge, but for love. Instead of running a criminal empire, he learned how to warm baby bottles at 3 a.m., change diapers without panic, and sing lullabies badly just to make his son smile. The man who once commanded armies now studied parenting videos and celebrated small victories like Alexander's first laugh. Leia watched every step of his transformation carefully. Trust wasn't something she could give back easily after everything they'd been through. But day by day, Victor proved he wasn't the same man who had once pushed her away. He was changing. Months later, in a small house far away from the violent world he once ruled, Victor Kane discovered something he had never understood before. peace. No bodyguards. No enemies waiting in the dark. Just a backyard where his son would one day learn to run, a wife who believed in second chances, and a life built not on fear, but on love. On Alexander's first birthday, surrounded by laughter and neighbors instead of criminals and gunmen, Victor realized the truth. The greatest empire he would ever build was not made of money or territory. It was made of family. And unlike the empire he left behind, this one could never be taken away. Because this time, it was built on choice. Victor Kane, former crime lord, reluctant hero, and now a devoted father, had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life. He found home.